Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, silly, strange, and sublime aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the go-to parent, aren't always accepted at work, among their friends, or in the community for what they're doing. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. Our podcast is just one of the many things we produce each week at the Company of Dads. We have various features, including the Lead Dad of the Week. We have our community online and in person. And of course, we have podcasts like this. The one-stop shop for all of it is our newsletter, The Dad. So sign up at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. That's thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Today, my guests are Angelique, Bellmer, Krembs, and Lori Tauber Marcus. They're wildly accomplished executives in their own right and both married to lead dads. But they're also part of the Band of Sisters, a group of 6 changemakers who have seen it all in corporate America, and not all that they've seen has been good. At one time or another, Angelique, Lori, and the other 4 all worked at PepsiCo. Each one went on to C-suite roles at companies including the NFL, Keurig, Equinox, ESPN, and BlackRock. Together, they have written a book, You Should Smile More: How to Dismantle Gender Bias in the Workplace. Welcome, Angelique and Lori, to the Company of Dads podcast.
Thanks, Paul. It's nice to be here.
All right, I got to be honest. Just saying the title of your book, it makes me squirm because I'm pretty sure it was a direct quote from someone that you worked for to one of you. So
Yes.
Tell me the story. Tell me the story about how somebody in a position of power thought at some point in time that this was a perfectly acceptable thing to say to a soon-to-be senior female executive.
I'm happy to jump in. What I wish was that it only had happened once, that it was a story that happened once to one of us. And the reality of it is, I'll hold this up in case anyone, I know it's a podcast, so most of you can't see it, but the cover of the book, it's a little Post-it note that says, in a really helpful way, you should smile more. And just parenthetically, when you show this to women, all women have the same reaction. They sort of do that, from Home Alone, like where the kid puts his hands on his face. It does the Kevin. I mean, women have that. They all sort of do the thing, which is, if I had $1 for every time I was told to smile more, I wouldn't have to work anymore. And then men often, when they see the title, they say things like, that's a great idea. People should smile more. That's actually really
helpful. Are you serious? Somebody says that to you?
Swear to you. And again,
I very encouraged that you cringed when you saw the title, because that means you get it.
You get it. And
I'm a smiley guy because I'm generally happy. So if anything, I try to smile less, but I cannot. Like, my wife is a senior executive on Wall Street. I have 3 daughters. I don't understand.
So.
And you work for PepsiCo. It wasn't like have a Coke and a smile. That's the slogan for a whole different beverage company.
I'll do the quick story and then I'll let Angelique jump in. So this is an example of language that it's something that people often say to women, both women and men, and they think it's super helpful. They think it's actually very thoughtful advice. And I believe in my heart of hearts, it is said from a place of goodness. It is said from a place of, like our mothers used to say, our grandmothers, you'd be so much prettier if you smiled more, right? And so, and again, it was a little bit annoying when our parents or grandparents said it. It's certainly not something that is necessary or appropriate in any way helpful in the workplace. So the quick story on the particular title was, this is actually something that was said to Katie, one of our sisters, after she left PepsiCo. She was told this. She was a very senior executive, SVP, C-suite level. She was told this in a performance review. So not just in a curbside coaching moment, but written down in a performance review.
Bullet point 7.
Exactly.
Smile more.
Yes, in 12-point Helvetica, that she should smile more. And the funny thing about it, that's not funny. Again, the person who wrote it was an excellent boss. They meant it in a really positive way, but it's a really good example. We'll talk more about sort of lazy, ambiguous language. And then just to sort of finish the thought is, I actually was told that I smile too much and I should smile less. And I was also a senior vice president, got to a pretty high level in the company, and a different company than where Katie was. And I was told basically I needed to be a little bit less accessible, create space between my team, not be so warm and inviting. So while Katie was being told that she should smile more, I was being told that I should smile less. And we put it all under the banner of sort of quote unquote, not very helpful suggestions.
Angelique, what's the response? Like, honestly, the serious part of the show, is there a response? And if so, what is it for, someone that you've all achieved great things, but for somebody who's in her 30s coming up and some jerk says, smile more, what's the response?
Well, I will tell you that, as Lori said, each of us was either told to smile more, smile less in some form or another. And I'm pretty sure that every single time when we heard that feedback, we didn't know what to say. So this is actually one of the hopefully useful things about the book is we can prepare people so when they hear that kind of vague feedback, smile more, smile less, that they can have a response in the moment, because we didn't have that. And the response is really a great framework that I'm going to give all the credit to Lori for, but it's situation, behavior, impact. So when you get that kind of vague, style-driven feedback, the advice that we say is, can you tell me more about where you saw that happen? What was the impact? What was the behavior? And most importantly, what was the impact? Because sometimes there's a real impact and you don't want to miss a blind spot. And if the person...
an impact on the person who's told to smile more, that impact
Yeah. So if somebody were to say, oh, when we were in this and such meeting, you were presenting to the board and you probably don't realize it, but you're on the Zoom. And as one of the board members was talking, you were kind of scowling. And they say the impact of that was it makes the board feel like they can't give you direct feedback on your programs, your creative, the advertising campaign that you were presenting.
Fair enough. But this is 2023. And when you were coming up, because it says you were from the 80s to 90s, 2000, Zoom didn't exist. So this is kind of direct feedback around, and nor did work from home exist. So this is direct feedback around the vast PepsiCo, soda complex. And I struggle so much. But let's use this as a way to pivot into the subtitle. Because it's so absurd to me that I have trouble not, is it Pepsi? They want to make sure everybody has good teeth because it's a sugary beverage. I don't want to, it's so absurd to me. So
it's not a Pepsi thing, by the way. I know it is.
I know it is.
It is every woman every woman that we talk to, whether they work in government, whether they work in a law firm, whether they work in banking, whether they work in consumer products or retail, immediately when you show them the title of this book, they've all been told this in various ways, shape, or form. And other women will say they get it when they're walking down the street. They'll get it in the subway. It's sort of like it's acceptable in our society for some reason. By the way, it's not. But for some reason, people think it's acceptable to give women all this incredibly subjective, stylistic feedback.
Yeah, but I think to get to that subject, I mean, one of the things we do in our house, as I said, my wife's a senior executive. We have 3 daughters. Is we model the behavior we want our girls to emulate: independence, curiosity, no tolerance for gender stereotypes or nonsense. And we're honest. My wife's always earned more than me. We're open about it. I'm better organized and more gregarious, and so I'm the BPP, that's birthday party parent, but I'm sure you know that. But what happens, those skills aren't modeled in every home, and then people get to the workplace and they're saying stupid things like this, but surely they're not saying it because I want to be a jerk or I want to be offensive or I honestly think that this is helpful. So to get to that subtitle, how do we start dismantling gender bias at work when I think in many cases this gender bias has been ingrained since little boys and little girls were 5, 6, 7, 8?
Well, one of the places to start that we realized when we got together and started talking about this is it's simple awareness. Because as Lori said, a lot of these little things, these little moments that we all experience that are the title of every chapter of the book, these little things, men are often not aware of the impact that they're having when they say or do these things. And what we found is because there's a lot of well-intentioned men out there, when we bring a little light to the subject and people realize that, oh, gee, I shouldn't tell a woman to smile more because it is stylistic and not substantive. Or I shouldn't call women girls in the workplace because that makes them feel less respected and diminutive. The light bulb goes off, and these are little actions that men will take immediately to be better advocates and allies in the workplace. So we think awareness goes a long way.
Yeah.
Well,
and I'll just
so go
add
ahead,
one
Laura.
thing to that, Paul, which is, so it starts from a place of unconscious bias. And I think the most important word in that phrase is unconscious. So we don't believe, yes, there's some people that are jerks, but we don't think that men are waking up in the morning saying, I'm going to ask the women to take all the notes in the meeting, and then I'm going to hold women back. Like, I don't think men are saying, like, I'm going to ask women to plan the baby showers or get the flowers for admin professional day, and I'm going to ask the men to be on the M&A task force. Like, I don't think people are consciously doing that. And so to Angelique's point, part of it is it's making everyone, not just men and women, because women, women do some of these things as well. It's not just like men bad, women good. And so the first thing, like Angelique said, is to make people aware of a situation, and then to give practical advice, whether you're the woman experiencing it, whether you're a bystander in the room, how to go from being a bystander to an ally. And then if you're the leader of any gender, is to be aware of that and then say, oh, what could I say or do instead? And again, they're very simple things, like you're at a work event on a weekend, there's a senior, the man is in charge, and there's like a senior woman and a senior man who work for him. They both have small children. And the boss is about to turn to the woman and say, who's watching your kids this weekend? Right. Now, he's not doing that to hold women back in the workplace, but the simple awareness is a real story that happened where he was about to say it. And then all of a sudden he said, I'm not asking the guy has two small children. Why am I going to other the woman by asking her? And so so the whole thing is ask both of them or ask neither of them, but don't just ask the woman. And it's little things like that. They sound so minuscule. As somebody said to me, you wrote a book about men not taking the cellophane off a bagel platter, for breakfast meetings. And it's like one by one, they don't sound like a big deal, but like Angelique said, it's like brick by brick by brick, you've just had this wall. And then over time, it either serves to just exhaust women, or worse yet, to kind of marginalize them.
Yeah, I think we talk about this at the Company of Dads, that resentment isn't born fully formed overnight. And if you look at it in the home, people fall in love, they get married, they have kids, and resentment blooms 10, 15 years later, as I say, like dust bunnies under a couch when you finally move. And you're like, how did it get there? And it gets there because we've never had these conversations. As you say, it's an accretion of little slights here and there. But I think about this so often, and I don't know if it's people get nervous or people just fall back on hackneyed things. I was at an event a month or so ago with my wife, and there was a senior female executive who had written a couple of interesting books, and she was talking about that, and I was one of the few men in the room. And afterwards, I don't even remember what it was exactly, but she made one of those really stupid comments like, oh, well, you have a good husband, or, hopefully he does the laundry, something so stupid that to me, I was like, man, this is what the Company of Dads is about. How do we normalize the role of lead dad? Right. You have to go to parent, you still work, you do this, you're not following these gender roles. But I wasn't going to say anything in that moment because this was this person's night. She was talking about a book, but I left. I was like, why? Like, why is it even, necessary? So if that's the starting point, how do you get to people, in a company who are in a position of power and get them to start thinking differently and not putting them on their back foot, not being like, hey, Bob, I can't believe you said that for the fourth time. Like, whoa, I didn't mean it. I'm a good guy. How do you get them in a normal training so that they understand and they become aware? Because you can't tick off the list of like, okay, Bob, don't say these 10 things. Oh, okay. All right. It's like, Bob, become aware of what these 10 things stand for and why they have it. So how do you guys, suggest doing that? The band of sisters, when you get together, how do you suggest doing that? So that, as you said, companies can ultimately do the right thing. They don't want to do the wrong thing. How do you help them do that?
Well, I'll start out by saying one of the things that we've seen be very successful since our book came out is we're often asked to speak at a company, and it almost always comes from a woman who has noticed the book, who goes back to the company and says, we need to have these women come and speak. And the starting point is often, great, we'll have an event with the women's network, and and what we've learned is that's where we make the ask for, we want the audience to be mixed. We don't want it to be just the women's group that we're talking to, even though it'll be very cathartic and everyone will, laugh and cry and all that stuff, but it won't be progress unless we can get men in the room to equally feel that they're a part of this. And not only that, we say, and we want a man to introduce us, a senior man at the company, to say why this is important, why it matters to this company. And by engaging the companies in that way, we can see the posture change. Like the men are usually very appreciative and they're glad to be brought in this way, because we have a real thesis that we're not calling men out, we're calling them in. So our tone is very specific about how we make it an inviting conversation. It's not a scolding one. And we found time after time that the men come up afterwards and goes, that was really helpful. That was really practical, inviting. And then they go talk about it to others. And so again, it's not going to be like a seismic change overnight, but it's still little by little getting to the right people with the message.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much. Oh, go ahead, Lori.
No, I was just going to add that. So what's funny is when we first wrote the book, the first few events that we did primarily in groups of women. Mm-hmm. And again, there's this thing that happens. You just see it on women's face. They have that sort of, it's like their shoulders, like they just relax and they go, oh, like, thank you. I feel seen. Like, thank you for putting words and clever pictures, if I might add. Like, thank you for bringing light to this subject. We try and, we're all marketers by background. So we sort of like name the situations, like the cellophane standoff or lazy language or things like that. So it's a little bit like, remember the old Jerry Seinfeld, like the close talker? Like if you have like simple language, then you can say it. Yeah. And in a really succinct way, like people know what it is. And so women feel very much like, I feel seen. Thank you for that. Thank you for giving words to that. We get a lot of, I thought I was the only one who fill in the blank. Like women will say, I thought I was the only one who counted the room. My joke is like, I'm very good at fractions. It's like, there's 7 people in the room, 1 out of 7, 14%, like 1 out of 8, 12.5%. Like I always know at any moment what percent of the room women are in. If you talk to women of color, they will tell you they know it for women, they know it for people of color, they know it for women of color. I mean, everyone's doing it, but everyone thinks they're the only one who does it. So for women, we get you see it, you get the, thank you for saying it, thank you for giving it language, I feel seen. And oh, by the way, thanks for the really good advice about the multiple ways that I could deal with it. And because there's 6 of us that wrote the book, it's not just like, this is what Sheryl Sandberg says to do. The answer is lean in, right? So there's 6 of us and we don't agree on everything, which is great. So there's often a C's funny and she's Midwestern and everyone likes her. So she can often use humor and kind of hit things direct on. I'm snarky in New Jersey. So like if I try and hit things direct on, it doesn't work as well. So I try and be a little bit conceptual. Angelique is kind of the queen of the like pre-meeting chit chat and then sort of the curbside debrief afterwards. Mitzi's been executive coaching for 10 years, so she's very good at the power of questioning. Katie's a little bit more direct. She hits things very head on. So the point is, women say that they like that they can meet us where they are, depending on their level of psychological safety. Humor might work, a direct thing might work. Sometimes the meeting after the meeting is more appropriate. So long-winded way of saying, I think women feel very much like it's very helpful for them. And then with men, there's this thing that happens once we realize we needed to start getting men in, because we couldn't just leave it to women to solve this issue. So with men, it's this amazing thing that happens, and it happens like in a second, where you'll see them and they'll look at you and they'll go, I didn't know that's a thing. Is that a thing? Tell me what to do about that thing so I don't do that thing anymore. Wait, what other things am I doing that I didn't realize?
Because I don't want to be that guy. Yeah.
I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. And so you literally see them. I know this is an audio medium, so people can't see my little finger going around in a circle, but they're literally going through the journey, like in these little like spirals over the course of like a 45-minute presentation. You see them just learning and learning and learning and learning. And interestingly, the people who take the most notes when we meet are the men, because they're having these incredible learning moments, to use your words. Like, I don't want to be that guy I want to be, I hate the word, but I want to be like a great guy. I want to be a good guy. I want to be the kind of guy that my daughters, my wife, my sister, my mother would be proud of. And so what we feel like is we're seeing these men who just, they don't want to be doing these kind of unconscious slights anymore. They want to be somebody who's doing the right thing. So it's very gratifying for both, men, women, people of any gender.
Obviously these are companies that are self-selecting. They want to do the right thing. So therefore they're bringing you in. And, we talk a lot at the Company of Dads that change starts in the middle. It's kind of catchy. And what do we mean? I mean that emerging leaders are closer to their workers and managing more of them, and obviously have a better read on what, working parents need, what working moms and lead dads need. And I'm sure you've seen this, I found, in my previous life in the New York Times, top leaders can often suffer from, confirmation bias. We did it this way and it worked, so why aren't you going to do it that way? Yet, you need buy-in at the top level. So when you're trying to negotiate that, both as almost, consultants going in and speaking, but also sort of empowering those people who are in the room, those emerging leaders, to go back, what are some of the things you help them, realize, so that when they get pushback from, the CEO, be it a man or a woman, but that person got to that job, starting in 1982 and had this, this path to success and it worked. What do you tell them to say, like, look, what worked in 1982 is not going to work today, or may work differently today?
Well, one of the helpful things is there is a ton of data out there that we can point to. We didn't have to do quantitative research ourselves. We did do a lot of qualitative research to make sure that things we experienced are still happening today. So we talked to a lot of young women and young men, but there's a lot of data that you can point to that says this is what's happening in the workplace today. And it's not just one study, it's dozens of studies. Occasionally you'll get someone who'll be like, don't just show me the same old McKinsey study. Well, good news or bad news is there's 12 other ones that you can point to across thousands of companies. The business case has been so well made, but the thing that people keep spinning around is like, so why is nothing changing? Like, why do we keep spinning? And I think some of it is that systemic, it's hard to get the message to the top and where real change can happen. But what we see is one of the trends in business today is the top having to pay more attention to what employees want. So, right, because the employees have a lot more agency than they ever have before. They're voting with their feet. And one of the more interesting things I found about the latest McKinsey study was they showed that women are leaving executive jobs at a higher rate than ever before. So, and a lot of the reasons are some of the things that we're talking about, these little things. But the younger generation is looking at them and taking cues. And so it's two generations at risk. So it's not going to happen quickly. I think that's part of the problem, but it is going to happen over time, where the best talent votes with their feet. And you're going to see an exodus, especially from the bigger companies who aren't able to be nimble. And they're hopefully going to see they need to do something different to address those needs.
It's interesting because we've found that, when we get lead dads who are senior executives in their firms and they parent, loudly or parent on their calendar, that gives sort of agency to all the people below them to say, okay, wow, if, John can go and put on his calendar, not, we draw a distinction between a lead dad and an event dad. If John is not putting on his calendar, going to a soccer game, well, everybody can do that. If John is putting on his calendar, pediatrician appointment or, family emergency, even if it's, whatever it may be, that gives all those people below John agency to do. But it also, as we talk about, it starts to remove the stigma that all parenting is at work is going to be done by women, because short of giving birth and breastfeeding, these are gender neutral roles. Anybody can take a kid to a pediatrician. Anybody can take a kid for a walk and get ice cream when, she's had a bad day. But at the same time, and look, you're speaking of the converted here. I get what you want. I've read those reports, and I want to believe what you're saying. But this is where I struggle, because a couple weeks ago, Jamie Dimon, one of the most revered CEOs in all of financial services, a problem happens, they call in Jamie Dimon. Like you've got it sounds like you've created the A-team here, or Ocean's 11, and Jamie would be the guy to come in, to finish the casino. But what does he do? He issues this order that all managing directors need to show up in the office 5 days a week. Now, 2 of his divisions, asset management and Chase, are run by women who have children. But forget that. That's a gendered bias way of looking at it. A lot of his managing directors are men who maybe want to be more involved parents. And guess what? Pre-pandemic, was a managing director really in the office 5 days a week? What a loser. That person should have been on a plane traveling, convincing somebody to give them money. Why does that? And here, there's no more revered CEO in financial services than Jamie Dimon. He's the father of 3 daughters. I've met Jamie several times. He says this, and we move on. And so, like, whatever, and I don't know the inner workings of JP Morgan well enough, but whatever is going on in the middle with those emerging leaders, if the message from the top is this, it seems to me like the choice for younger men and women is either adapt or leave. I mean, is there a third option? If particularly people who want to work in an environment without ingrained gender bias.
It's so interesting when you were saying. By the way, I know you're a writer by background, so I'm not surprised that you have all these wonderful phrases. I love what I've been writing down. We talked about like parent loudly and parenting with your calendar and event dad and all of that. They're all like, it's such good language. I love it. It's interesting when you were saying a few minutes ago about blah, 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 people who want to do things. The thing that came to my head is if my daughters were on the phone, they'd go like, okay, boomer, that I hate that expression, but it's sort of there. And by the way, it's not just Jamie Dimon, it's women as well. It's this sort of a bias. I would say it goes beyond gender bias, which is just that the way that we did it must be the right way. And it takes I think, a more evolved leader to say, just because we did it that way and we were successful doesn't mean it was the right way to do it. It doesn't mean it was the best way to do it. And I feel like I am, and by the way, I loved, Paul, that you took this on your LinkedIn and talked about that you were going to be like criticizing Jamie Dimon.
Making friends everywhere I go.
Exactly. And so, but what I think is interesting about it is, I'm just sort of a rabid consumer of everything to do with hybrid work, return to the office, all of that. I'm kind of obsessed with trying to find out who has the right answer, as though there's some magical answer, which there isn't. But like, I read everything, I listen to every podcast. I'm really trying to find the insight. And I think in general, just like we talk about lazy language in the book, I think the lazy answer is the way we did it is the way that's the best way to do it. I just think that's a lazy way of thinking. Right. And from everything that I've read, the answer is you have to find a way to spread culture. You have to find a way to have people have meaningful contact where they're in the same place. But that doesn't mean being in the office 5 days a week. And any person, especially young people, will tell you they just love commuting like an hour and 45 minutes each way to get to Lower Manhattan so they can sit on a Zoom call with their colleagues in London. Like,
nothing lifts the spirit more than that. We've done research on it. It lifts the spirit.
Time. So I think it's sort of the workplace equivalent of kind of lazy thinking. I think it's sort of easy thinking to say that the way things were is the way they should be. And I love the book. I'm going to get the title wrong, but the Marshall Goldsmith book on coaching, which is what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
Or the skills that brought you here are not necessarily the skills that are going to bring you forward. I think it's the same thing about this. I think for Jamie Dimon and everyone else, it's like, how about we take a creative problem solving approach, think about what we're trying to do, and then what's the best way to do it that also kind of keeps our employees engaged.
Well, that, Angelique, I want you to kind of pick up on something that Lori said there. She's a consumer of all information about hybrid working and different ways of working. And you have this term, Angelique, that you use, performance with purpose. And it sounds like the ultimate sort of 2023, post-pandemic, way of thinking. I'm not joking. It just sounds great. Like, and you also say, great results start with why, which it's really heartening for my 5-year-old because she's going to be amazing because that's what she says all the time. But that concept of, I don't need to sit on if I'm a 20-something-year-old, 30-something-year-old, why the hell am I going to sit on a train to do a Zoom call? But when you talk about performance with purpose, it takes it, I believe, as it resonates in my head, out of that realm of griping or complaining about what I have to do, or, well, I did that, blah, 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 and puts it firmly on, not about me, the worker, but about, the company, the community, whatever it may be. Unpack that phrase for us. Where did it come from, and how do you see it being used in this new world of work?
Well, the genesis of the phrase came from Ingenuity years ago when she was chairman of PepsiCo, and she introduced this way of thinking that was performance with purpose, meaning that as a company, we were going to continue to deliver business performance, but we were going to be conscious of our purpose as a citizen of the corporate world. And it was an idea that I think was a little ahead of its time at the time. It was good that purpose was starting to be introduced, but it was still not common for decisions to actually be made that either gave equivalency or even, put purpose ahead of performance. Performance was always king. Yeah. What I think has evolved, and what I've seen in the last couple of years, is a shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And I believe this is where the future of business is going. I mean, the Business Roundtable a few years ago declared that stakeholders should be the right, stakeholders that, audience that we're thinking about as businesses. And those stakeholders. And
stakeholders, just to clarify for those stakeholders, including employees, correct? Including,
exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. Employees being one of the critical audiences that as a company you need to care about in order to be successful and sustainably into the future. And these are knowable things. Your employee base is a group that you can talk to, you can survey, you can look at metrics. Like it's very measurable if you choose to do it. And it is proven that it is an indicator of business results when you can drive the right people set up culturally and support wise. So purpose for me then becomes like, why are people showing up? Why are they choosing to stay at your company? Why are they going to give more than the minimal to the job that they're doing? It's because they're motivated by some reason why the company exists. And I think there are some critics that would say, purpose marketing is, BS, and like that's where lazy marketers go. But I disagree, because I don't think it's about marketing. If it is, that's the mistake. Purpose has to be what's driving the business. It's the strategy. It's the, how you measure success. So I'm very passionate about how it should show up.
And if I understand it correctly, it's the risk of hypocrisy. If your slogan is, we're the most caring company in the world, and you're a bunch of jerks that make everybody go in the office 5 days a week, it doesn't quite hold up. As opposed if you just show that you're a very caring company and you want to drive with purpose, and then your message will come from that, and that will be the marketing. Is that the correct way to, or one way to?
Yes, it's all about authenticity. It's right. What you say has to show up in what you do. And as, as a company, if you're putting out, this is what we stand for, here's what, and then your employees can visibly say, that's not how I experience the work here. That's a big problem for your recruiting, for your retention. You're not going to get people to want to go through whatever it takes to get promoted. They're going to look elsewhere.
You fire a couple of them and then everybody goes quiet. Don't worry about that. Oh, wait, that's not the right way to look at it. Oh, God, it was my inner Jamie Dimon. I'm so sorry. Oh, God, I keep doing that. Tell me this. I got 2 more big questions for you. But the first one is, you have the 2 of you, the 6 of you total, have this amazing amount of experience, and you've distilled a lot of that into this remarkable book. But if the 30-year-old version of yourselves, of that young woman working really hard at XYZ company, is listening to this, or that 30-year-old woman's a boyfriend or spouse, because it is a company of dads, if he's listening to this, and that person is trying to make her way in the world, what is the advice? I'll let Lori go first and Angelique just to mix it up. What's that advice that you would give to your 30-year-old self who wants to one day be where, the band of sisters are in their careers and in their lives?
Well, there's a lot on this topic specifically. What I would say is is don't do what we did. So we just sort of like, we winced, we, grin and bear it, all of that. And we just didn't say anything because we were trying to fit in. We worked in a world that was, kind of corporate America run by, white men in their 50s and 60s. And so we were just trying to fit in and survive and then ultimately thrive. But we did it by sort of fitting in. And we didn't want to stand out for anything other than our work. And so some of these things, we just we dealt with it. And we probably coached a lot of women to sort of, accommodate versus saying something. And I look at it and I'm like, oh, good for us. We all made it. Like, we all became C-suite executives. Woo, woo. We're all on corporate boards. Woo, woo. But like, it didn't change fast enough because we didn't use our voice to change things, which is why now we're using a lot of our voices to try and change things. So my biggest piece of advice is, pick your battles. Don't be one of those people that every day, everything, you're just sitting around criticizing everything out of everyone's mouth. But being silent doesn't change things. And so I think people should be a little bit less accommodating. We were way too accommodating. And like I said, in the book, because we have different styles, we try and give people language hacks of how to deal with it, and then different style ways that you can deal with it. But not dealing with it means that 30 years from now, we'll be having the same conversation.
Yeah. Excellent. And Angelique, something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say freely that I did not know what I was doing. In my 30s, I wish I'd had this book, because I look back on some of the things that we now talk about. I'm like, oh my gosh, like sponsorship. Like, why was I not paying attention to that? Like, I didn't know the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, and some of these things. But I would also say that I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew how I was feeling, and I sort of followed that by learning from the managers I had at Pepsi. They were the ones that made me feel awesome, and there were many of those, and the ones that made me feel terrible, and I didn't want to be that kind of manager. So I just tried to model the people that made me feel awesome and try to pay that forward. When I got married in my 30s, so I was not a young bride, and had children, my husband and I would talk often about how we saw this as a partnership and shared work, and with child rearing. What I didn't know was how hard it was going to be down the line when we actually made the decision for my husband to stay home and be the lead parent, lead dad, and for me to continue to try to be the breadwinner and the executive. I didn't know what was going to be hard about that. It seemed so like it was fine for us, so why was it going to be difficult? So you live and learn, and you learn from others' experiences. So I'm hopeful that through all the stories we tell, like, it's paying it forward, so somebody may benefit from not running into the same walls that we did.
I just want to add a footnote to that, because I'm sort of anti credentialing people to the nth degree on these podcasts. But I mean, Angelique, you went to Georgetown and got your MBA from Dartmouth, the Tuck School of Business. And of course, right. Lori, you went to Wharton. You are not wildly well educated, but it's almost like, the business schools back then were not preparing you for this. They
right,
prepared
right.
You could do, marketing, business analysis, all the like core, so yeah, I hate this phrase as well, hard skills. But what about the soft skills? Well, they're all skills. So you don't have hard skills. You have skills that get you through, and none of those were really taught in those elite business schools, and you're sent out there.
Paul, can I just add one thing to that? So we've done a lot of the events that we've done since we launched the book. A lot of them have been at major corporations and professional services firm, but and those have been incredible. And again, trying to reach as many people as we can to become zealots about the topic, because we can't always be in the room. But one of the things that we've done in addition to that, which we love, is speaking at business schools. Mm-hmm. Exactly to your point. Yeah. So we were up at Tuck with the great Dr. Ella Bell, who had my favorite line of everything when we were talking about micro moments or microaggressions. And she said, they're not microaggressions when they happen to you. And meaning there is no such thing as a microaggression. If it's landing on you, it doesn't feel like a microaggression. And then we were up at MIT earlier this year, and I would say probably some of the most engaging Q&A that we've had is with these future leaders. And we think it's really important to educate those leaders because they are going to be running corporate America and in the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So we think it's kind of a unique opportunity to start to impact the way that those future leaders are thinking while they're still in the relatively early stage of their careers.
Yeah, good. This has been wonderful. Thank you for joining me. Last question. I can't let you off the hook without this one, since it is the Company of Dads podcast. And I know, Lori, your husband, James, is a lead dad. He became a lead dad. And in Angelique, you mentioned your husband, opting to become the lead dad in your careers. Tell us, because one of the things we're doing is we reach out to men, hopefully embracing this role or already in this role, is trying to tell them, it's okay, it's normal. You unlink masculinity and money. You're working as a partner. If you want to keep it in masculine terms, a sports team, whatever gets you out of bed in the morning. But when you think about the conversation, and I'll go Angelique first and Lori, the conversations that you had with your spouses when you agreed as a family that your spouse would become the lead dad, what were those conversations like, and how did it go?
Well, a quick story. My husband left his job. So he was a senior executive in the IT space doing electronic bond trading software, building the systems. So like super heady stuff. He decided to leave in 2014. And we had always talked about having one of us home when the kids got old enough to, need more emotional as well as physical support.
Yeah, sure.
It was 2015 that the article came out from Anne-Marie Slaughter's husband, Andrew Moravec, talking about his role as the lead dad. And it gave us language that we didn't have immediately. And we're like, yes, that's what we're trying to do. It's not stay-at-home dad. It's not Mr. Mom. It's not, like this
retired. It's not house husband.
It's not retired. And my husband felt very strongly. He's like, when people would ask him what he was doing, he didn't want to say, I'm retired. He didn't want to say, he wanted to give, equal weight to what he was doing. And I think we were both a little surprised at how hard it was, because you immediately lose the network, because the network of moms is not very welcoming of the dad that shows up. And so you have to go about it differently and find your way. But I think it's been a fulfilling journey, because I think he's really relished the time that he's had to be in this role. Our kids have benefited from it. I've obviously benefited from it. And I think the idea of role modeling a new way is I don't know, gives us hope, that for both our daughter and our son, that they see me working, him in, the lead dad role. It's good for both of them.
And just for the listener, that the article that Angelique referenced, Anne-Marie Slaughter was then, I think, the Deputy U.S. Secretary of State, pretty senior role, and her husband was a professor at Princeton. He may still be, so wildly successful people. And now, Laura, I know a bit more about your husband, James, making me seem like a slouch here, since Angelique's husband is building complicated bond trading software, and your husband is a PhD in mechanical engineering. What is
electrical engineering? My father-in-law
engineering.
has a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT. James, my slacker husband, only has a PhD in electrical engineering from Tufts University. Slacker that he is. So it's interesting. I'm loving, as I mean, Angelique and I have talked probably every day over the past 4 years, and I don't think it clicked until just now how important language is. I mean, we know it's important. We're marketers by background. A lot of the commentary we get on the book, as I said earlier, is thank you for naming these things and bringing language to it. So I think our quick situation is earlier in, and my daughters are older, they're in their 20s now. And so when they were very little, James was a technology consultant, and then he was a part-time college professor. And so we never made that decision that he was going to be a lead parent or a lead dad. And we did it a little bit in a crisis moment. And I think I've told you this, Paul, I'll be forever grateful to him for this, because it was a moment one of our daughters was struggling getting something done. And James just came to me. I was working like crazy. I was going to Chicago every week. And he just said to me, we had great nannies up until that point, amazing nannies, like thank you, Lana, and Wendy, and Alicia. And then we had a nanny that was like embarrassingly bad, like really bad. Like if I told you,
nameless, who will remain nameless. Here.
Exactly, because I don't want her to like throw things at my house. But she was like embarrassingly bad, and it was terrible, and we just needed help. And James came to me at a point where I was traveling all the time, and I was doing this, what I would consider sort of an epic opportunity. I was still at PepsiCo, kind of a job of a lifetime up while I was there. And he came to me and he said, I think I'm thinking about that we're going to fire the nanny, and I'm going to stay home.
Let's just call her Voldemort, okay? Just Voldemort. Just like, yes. Just quote Harry Potter.
And so,
she who shall not be named.
Yes, I think we should fire she who shall not be named, and I'm going to help our daughter get through this particular event that she was trying to get through, where she just needed kind of extra parenting. And it hadn't even occurred to me to ask him. And I'm going to get teary talking about this because it was so selfless on his part. He was doing consulting. He had a career. He had something that he was going to give up, but he just saw the greater need, that our needs had changed. Our children needed us in a way they hadn't before. And so my point was, so I think he did it. Now, granted, this is 2007. So just before social media ruined the world and before we all had iPhones and all of that. But there wasn't language. He didn't have language to describe it. He didn't have language when people said like, oh, James, what do you do? And I can just remember, I can feel it today, him feeling that sort of awkward thing when you'd go to something in our little town and all the dads are like, hedge fund guys and lawyers and investment bankers, whatever. He didn't have the language. And I think that made it harder for him than it needed to be. And, the emails were all to the moms, the phone calls went to the moms, all of that. And so I think it really reinforces something that Angelique and I know, first as marketers and now as authors, is this power of language to name things. I just think is really important. And in hindsight, like I said, I'm so grateful to James for having very selflessly done this. And I wish it could have been a little bit easier for him at the time.
Well, hopefully it is now with the company of dads.
Our kids are in their 20s.
Blatant plug here. So, Angelique, Laurie, thank you again for being on the Company of Dads podcast today. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with you.
Great fun, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you for listening to the Company of Dads podcast. I also want to thank the people who make this podcast and everything else that we do at the Company of Dads possible. Helder Mira, who is our audio producer, Lindsay Decker, who handles all of our social media, Terry Brennan, who's helping us with the newsletter and audience acquisition, Emily Servin, who is our web maestro, and of course, Evan Roosevelt, who is working side by side with me in many of the things that we do here at the Company of Dads. It's a great team, and we're just trying to bring you the best in fatherhood. Remember, the one-stop shop for everything is our newsletter, The Dad. Sign up at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Thank you again for listening.